The officers, non-commissioned officers and men of A Company and attached 35th Infantry Battalion, United Nations Forces in the Congo, took responsibility for the UN post at Jadotville on the 3rd of September 1961. On the 9th of September, they were surrounded by a large force of Congolese gendarmerie. Early on the morning of the 13th of September, the company came under attack, which they endured almost continuously until the 17th of September. Despite their courageous resistance, A Company were taken captive. By this time, A Company had run out of water and several of their men were wounded. Their sacrifices in the service of peace are remembered with pride. Jadotville Garrison, A Company, and attached 35th Irish Battalion, Commandant Patrick Quinlan, Captains Dermot Byrne, William Donnelly, Thomas McGinn, Lieutenants William Carey, Joseph Leach, Thomas Quinlan, Chaplain Thomas Fagan, Sergeants John Prendergast, Patrick Neville, Geoffrey Cuff, Henry Dixon, Francis Gilsonan, Walter Hegarty, Patrick Joyce, Thomas Kelly, John Monaghan, Martin McCabe, Kevin McLaughlin, James Ree, George Tiernan. Corporals: William Allen, Colin Brannigan, Patrick Burke, James Dempsey, John Devine, John Donnelly, Patrick Duffy, John Foley, John Forrester, John Kerr, Brendan Laffery, Michael Lynch, John McAnley, James McArdle, John McDonough, Thomas MacDonald, John McEntee, John McManus, John O'Brien, Peter O'Callaghan, Michael O'Connor, Timothy Quinn, Patrick Rattigan, Joseph Reelahan, Christopher Roach, Michael Smith, Sean Tiernan, Francis Williams. Privates: Gerard Battles, Francis Boland, Joseph Bracken, Robert Bradley, Michael Brennan, John Broderick, Michael Broderick, James Byrne, Patrick Conlon, Desmond Conley, John Conway, Charles Cooley, Thomas Cunningham, Patrick Delaney, Albert Dale, Patrick Donnelly, John Dowler, Joseph Duff, William Duffy, Morris Doyle, Patrick Dunleavy, Anthony Dykes, Michael Farrell, James Freely, Simon Finless, Dominic Flaherty, John Flynn, John W. Flynn, Thomas Flynn, Michael Galvin, Patrick Gilday, John Gorman, Gerard Gormley, Noel Graham, Michael Green, Thomas Gunn, Michael Hannigan, Dominic Harkin, James Harper, William Heffernan, Daniel Hegarty, Henry Hegarty, Joseph Hegarty, Gerald Henley, Patrick Hogan, Thomas Hogan, William Hughes, William Keane, Patrick Larkin, Thomas Larkin, Kieran Lynch, Edward Marr, Francis Malone, Joseph Maloney, Donald Manley, John Manning, James Myler, Daniel Malone, Patrick Monaghan, James Murray, James McCourt, Michael McDermott, Thomas McDonough, Matthew McGrath, Joseph McGuinness, Terence McMahon, Francis McManus, Anthony McNeary, John Niesel, James O'Keane, Joseph O'Keane, Robert Orr, Michael O'Sullivan, John Peppard, Christopher Powell, John Purtle, Matthew Quinlan, James Redmond, Daniel Regan, William Regis, Anthony Roper, James Scanley, Michael Seary, John Shanahan, John Stafford, Noel Stanley, Timothy Sullivan, Bernard Sweeney, Philip Sweeney, James Tahini, Michael Tighe, Charles Tompkins and Patrick Williams. Attached were Commandant Joseph Clune, Lieutenant Kevin Knightley, Sergeant Coleman Geary, Corporals Thomas O'Connor and James Lucy, Privates James Kavanagh, Michael Dunn, William Reedy, Joseph O'Brien, Patrick McCartan, Michael Nolan, John Shanahan, and helicopter pilot Eric Thors, Lars Forger and Bergen Hovinen. Minister.
Thank you, Gaelic, and I hope that many of the individuals and their families will gain solace and pride from being read out in Seanad Éireann in the way that you've just done that. And I think it's a recognition of the stature in which they are held by the political system across all sides of the political divide in Ireland. So thank you for that. I welcome the opportunity to come here today to discuss the recognition of the Irish military service at Jadotville. As you were aware, the siege of Jadotville occurred during the United Nations operation in Congo. This was the first peacekeeping mission in which significant numbers of Irish soldiers took part. A total of 6,000 Irish soldiers served in the Congo from 1960 until 1964. And I want to take this opportunity to recall the contribution of all who served in the various Irish contingents over the course of this long and very difficult and complex mission. At the outset today, I would like to particularly acknowledge that last Sunday, the 8th of November, marked the 60th anniversary of the Niemba ambush, where 9 members of the Defence Forces were killed while serving with the UN operations in the Congo. This was, and still remains today, the largest single loss of life in any one incident in the history of the Defence Forces' participation in UN service. Two retired Defence Force members who survived the Niemba ambush are still alive today. Due to the prevailing public health measures, it was not possible to hold a commemorative event to mark this tragic incident. The General Officer commanding 2 Brigade, Brigadier General Tony Cudmore, laid a wreath at Cattlebrewer Barracks last weekend to remember those 9 soldiers from the 33rd Infantry Battalion who lost their lives while on UN service during the Niemba ambush. Defence Force Veterans Associations also mark this significant anniversary. Turning to the events at Jadotville in September 1961, the siege of Jadotville was a prominent event that occurred during Ireland's peacekeeping mission in the Congo in September 1961, where A Company, 35th Infantry Battalion, came under sustained attack. From the 13th to the 17th of September, the men of A Company endured almost continuous attack. At the end of the siege, the men were taken into captivity until finally released on the 25th of October 1961. In 1962 and 1965, a constituted medals board considered the issue of award of medals, including nominations that had been submitted in respect of some of the men of A Company. This medals board did not award any medals whose citation mentioned Jadotville. This decision was subsequently reviewed by the medals board, and it was indicated that the issues raised had received due consideration and that they were not prepared to alter their findings. In 2004, a broader examination of the events at Jadotville was conducted by military officers. This board recommended the events of Jadotville and the contribution of the 35th Battalion be given recognition. The outcome of this broader examination of the events at Jadotville had led to a number of initiatives that honoured the collective actions and bravery of the men of A Company at Jadotville and recognise that very significant contribution of A Company and of the 35th Battalion as a whole to the UN Peace Support Mission in Congo. Recognition of the courageous deeds and valiant actions of the members of A Company companies over the years have included a presentation of scrolls to A Company in 2006, portraits of Lieutenant Colonel McNamee, 35th Battalion Commander, and Commandant Quinlan, Company Commander, A Company, were commissioned in 2006. In July of 2010, the 50th anniversary of the first deployment to the Congo was commemorated in a highly publicised and well-attended event at Casement Aerodrome in Baldonnel. A nominal roll of A Company, printed in copper, was affixed to the monument in Costume Barracks and was unveiled as part of the 50th anniversary of the Jadotville affair in September 2011. On the occasion of the 55th anniversary of the siege of Jadotville, a unit citation to honour the collective actions and bravery of the men of A Company was issued. This unit citation was presented to the company in recognition of their collective heroism and professional performance during the siege of Jadotville, whilst cut off from support and reinforcements. And this was the first time a unit citation was awarded within the Defence Forces. In June 2017, at the request of the then Minister with responsibility for defence, a further review of archival records relating to the siege of Jadotville was undertaken by the military authorities, but this did not uncover any additional information that wasn't already known. The findings of this review clarified that there is no certainty available in archive records on the totality of A Company personnel recommended for awards. Furthermore, it revealed no evidence of the outcome of the award consideration process. Given the increase in knowledge and understanding of the unique and exceptional circumstances surrounding the siege of Jadotville, the then Taoiseach and the then Minister with responsibility for defence decided that the most appropriate decision would be to collectively honour the actions of A Company at Jadotville further. The Government committed, as an exceptional step, to award a medal known as An Bun Jadotville, or the Jadotville Medal, to each member of A Company, 35th Infantry Battalion, and to the family representatives of deceased members. This specially commissioned medal gives full and due recognition in honour of the courageous actions of the men of A Company during the siege of Jadotville. The words inscribed on the medal are Costan Kalma, which means valiant defence, and Mishnach, or courage. These words were carefully chosen in order to pay tribute to the courageous actions of the men of A Company. Coupled with the unit citation that issued in 2016, no other collective award of this nature has been made to date, and the uniqueness of such awards should not be understated. In recent times, the issue of awarding military medals for gallantry and the Distinguished Service Medals, MMG and DSM, to some or all of the soldiers of A Company has been raised in a number of fora. The personnel from A Company who were recommended to be considered for the award of the MMG or DSM underwent due process by a properly constituted medals board in 1962 and 1965. There is a well-established institutional process that takes place within a relatively short time frame after events to assess the contemporaneous facts and findings. The decision to award an MMG or DSM is one for the Minister for Defence under regulations. However, such a decision is taken on foot of the advice from a military board duly appointed by the Chief of Staff in accordance with Defence Force regulations. This is a sensible and proper approach. As Minister, I rely on professional military advice on such matters, and I believe all politicians should. I do not intend to award MMGs or DSMs without the required evidence and appropriate recommendations coming from military sources. To do so would be anathema to military personnel generally. The sound and reasoned judgment that comes of senior military experience and a determination to get to the facts and bring forward a fair and balanced recommendation is what is required when it comes to the award of such medals. The award of Distinguished Service Medals and military medals for gallantry are provided for in Defence Force Regulations A9. The criteria for the award of medals provide that the initial recommendation for the award of a medal to an individual may be made by an officer of the Defence Forces and shall be accompanied by a statement setting out the grounds for such recommendation and giving such other relevant information as will enable higher authority to determine the merits of the act or acts. The recommendation shall normally be based upon the statement of a person who has personal knowledge or was an eyewitness to the act or acts. The act or acts must be described specifically in detail. When the initial recommendation is made by an officer who has not personal knowledge or was not an eyewitness to the act, the testimony of at least one person who has personal knowledge or was an eyewitness to the act must accompany the recommendation. Where possible, the testimony of more than one such person shall be obtained. That's the regulation, which I know sounds somewhat formal. The introduction of any change to the regulation or to the criteria for the award of DSMs or MMGs is not a straightforward matter and has many associated complexities. For example, consideration must be given to any potential unintended consequences arising, such as maintaining the integrity of the award of medals system and implications for previous decisions of properly constituted military medals boards. The availability of documentary evidence and official records presents a significant challenge in this case. It has been previously indicated that any additional documentation, information or evidence to support the request to award such medals will of course be considered. At this juncture, no information has come to light yet anyway that would be cause for the matter to be re-examined. While I fully appreciate that the experiences in the Congo and at Jadotville were particularly distressing, it is also the case that many other members of the Defence Forces who have served overseas have been involved in serious and disturbing instances where death and severe injury have also resulted. This is in no way intended to denigrate the distress suffered and the courageous actions of those involved at Jadotville, of course. Rather, it is to indicate that service in a war-torn region inevitably exposes members of the Defence Forces to the possibility of involvement in instances of very serious and distressing nature. That's what it means to be a peacekeeper and a soldier. The Defence Forces have participated in overseas missions mandated by the UN since 1958. We can be justifiably very proud of the fact that they have completed approximately 70,000 individual tours of duty overseas in that time. In that time, a total of 7 personnel have received the Military Medal of Gallantry, while 90 personnel have been awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for acts relating to service overseas. The Defence Forces can only recommend the award of bravery and Distinguished Service Medals, of course, in exceptional circumstances. Cases for the award of such medals are examined in great detail, having regard to the circumstances pertaining to each particular case and on a basis of comparison with previous similar awards. There are awards made to all personnel who serve on overseas missions, which aim to recognise the contribution made by the members of each contingent serving on a peacekeeping mission and the difficult circumstances in which they have to operate. In this regard, the personnel referred to have received both a United Nations medal for their service in Congo, awarded by the UN, and the United Nations Peacekeeping Medal Award, awarded by the Irish Government. As I've outlined earlier, in 2017 the Government decided as an exceptional step to award a medal known as An Bun Jadotville or the Jadotville Medal to each member of A Company 35th Infantry Battalion and to the family representatives of deceased members. This unique and specially commissioned medal gives full and due recognition in honour of the courageous actions to the men of A Company during the siege of Jadotville. Notwithstanding all of the actions that have been undertaken to date, including the reviews and examinations of events of Jadotville, which I outlined earlier. The issue is receiving further consideration now by my office and by the Chief of Staff. I have asked the Chief of Staff for his views in writing and in person. The Chief of Staff has proposed the establishment of an independent group of external experts to consider the entire case and evidence, including new evidence, if any is available. My understanding is that on that board will be ex-military officers, a historian, an academic that understands the context and what happened in some detail, so that we will have genuine and independent expertise examining this case, which I know many of you have raised politically in various different forums and in some cases directly with me as well. This independent review group will report its findings and recommendations to the Chief of Staff, as it should, and the Chief of Staff will then make recommendations as appropriate to my office on the basis of that work and the recommendations that come from it. Can I just say, because I know there's huge emotion linked to the Jadotville case, and rightly so, this was something for us all, but in particular those linked to the Defence Forces, to be very proud of. And the men that served there are responsible for extraordinary service to peacekeeping and to Ireland in what was an incredibly complex and challenging and difficult theatre of conflict. And the government, at different times with different ministers, have tried to recognise that in different ways. But the conversation still continues in relation to Jadotville. And that's why I'm asking, I have asked the Chief of Staff, and he's responded to me in a constructive way in terms of a process that we believe is now appropriate. But I do think we need to be careful here. I don't believe we can move to a situation where politicians decide who gets medals and what kind of medals they get in terms of service either at home or abroad. This has to be a recommendation that comes from the military themselves. That's how this works. Otherwise, we move into a space of trying to please people politically, as opposed to robust assessment through military structures, through a medals board in these cases, where assessments are made. That being said, my job as Minister for Defence legally, as the head of the defence infrastructure for the country, is to make sure that the context is fully understood, and if new evidence arises or if new perspectives develop, that is recognised and that appropriate reviews take place. And I believe that is the context in which we're now looking at this review, which is not the first, but I think the context of it is important. So finally, I would like to take this opportunity to recall the contribution of all men and women of the Defence Forces who have been deployed on missions in the cause of peace overseas. They are not only soldiers, they are ambassadors too, for Ireland, for what we stand for our commitment to peace and peace management abroad. The continued participation in United Nations missions illustrates the very positive difference a small country like Ireland can make in many parts of the world that desperately need our intervention. So I thank the Seanad for this opportunity to recognise the service overseas of so many Irish Defence Force personnel, whether they be Air Corps, Naval Service or indeed Army, which is the case for the vast majority. And in particular, I thank you for giving me an opportunity to give both the history and the perspective on Jadotville, which is certainly not a closed book. And as soon as the Chief of Staff concludes the process that he has agreed to undertake now, I'll be more than happy to come back to the Seanad to talk to you about those recommendations and the decisions that can be made on the back of them.
Thank you, Senator Fiona O'Loughlin.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. And I think it's very fitting that we have this debate today on the 102nd anniversary of World War I ending, and in commemoration of the 49,000 Irish soldiers who lost their lives indeed during that war. So, you know, I think having the opportunity to address our war heroes in Jadotville is significant. And I also want to mention on a personal level Sergeant John Lynch, who died in the Lebanon in 1997. I was teaching his daughter Christine at the time, and I will never forget the loss and tragedy and trauma visited to Christine, her mum and her little brother Scott, and the military funeral in Newbridge, in the church beside the school where I taught, is something that will always be with me. Coming from Kildare and living so close to the Curragh, the issues affecting the Defence Forces are very close to my heart, and it is absolutely my contention that the veterans of the siege of Jadotville need to be properly recognised, and I raised that 2 weeks ago here in the Seanad. And, you know, Minister, you mentioned that any awards that would be recommended have to have been seen as in exceptional circumstances. Well, the siege of Jadotville was most certainly exceptional, and the bravery and the courage shown by these men were absolutely exceptional. Minister, you talk about the complexities that are involved in the awarding of medals and the legal position by which you are unable to make awards of the Military Medal for Gallantry other than on the recommendation of a military board appointed by the Chief of Staff. I do think, however, there are occasions when we need to find an alternative solution when a set of regulations appear to be unfair, and I hope that this is such an instance where we can honour the 29 veterans of Jadotville and still protect, of course, the integrity of the award system. I do welcome the fact that the Chief of Staff has proposed the establishment of an independent group of external experts to consider the entire case and evidence, and I know that we absolutely await the findings of that. In 2020, we are highly respected UN peacekeepers who have played a very significant role in Cyprus, East Timor, Lebanon and Chad. And we have to remember that in 1961, this was one of our very first international military deployments. In 1958, a small number of observers had gone to the Lebanon, and then in 1960, Irish troops were sent to the Congo as part of the UN force ONUC. A total of 6,000 Irishmen in total served in the Congo from 1960 to 1964, and I would recommend that members read The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, which really gives us a glimpse into the lives of those at that time. Of course, one of the largest ONUC engagements in which Irish troops were involved was the siege of Jadotville, and the odds at the time were absolutely stacked against the Irish contingent. They were lightly armed and had only one truck, 2 jeeps and Apache radio communications when they were attacked by a larger force of almost 4,000 troops. The Irish Commandant Quinlan was an astute tactician, and his soldiers repeatedly repelled the attackers. It is a wonder that there were no Irish fatalities sustained, given the nature of the onslaught that they endured. Facing insurmountable odds, A Company had to eventually surrender after exhausting their ammunition and supplies, and they were held captive for 5 very difficult weeks until their eventual release, and were home in Ireland in December 1961. The return to Ireland was very difficult, and for many of the returned soldiers, they felt it was better for their careers not to mention Jadotville. There was a sense of embarrassment about the surrender and about some poor decision-making by senior army officials. According to Commandant Quinlan's son Leo, 5 Irish soldiers who survived that siege subsequently took their own lives. And, it is a shame that for so many of them, that they were not alive to see the review of the battle and the awarding of various recognitions, like the anniversary commemorations of the first deployment in July 2010 in Baldonnel, or the unit's citation given to A Company. The courage and the tenacity shown by Irish forces at Jadotville are not in question. The 29 veterans who served with such bravery deserve to be honoured, And I really hope that the Chief of Staff can find a solution to bring closure to this very lengthy campaign for the veterans and for their families, and indeed to many in this House. Where our heroes deserve absolutely these awards, we also need to honour their memory and their courage by improving the present-day situation of our soldiers. As I mentioned, our Defence Forces pay and conditions remain a huge unresolved issue, and fighting for decent pay and conditions for all of our Defence Forces certainly remains one of my key objectives and that of my party. The impact of poor pay and conditions on Defence Forces families has real and significant consequences in my own constituency of Kildare South. I acknowledge the extra £32 million in Budget 2021, but more needs to be done. And in the words of WPDF, over the last 9 years, the Defence Forces have suffered from political neglect and institutional indifference. There are many issues that need to be resolved. Last year's agreement on technical pay to increase military allowances has not been implemented. That's completely wrong. Along with Senator Dermot Wilson, our spokesperson on defence, I've met with PD4 and RACO recently, and I fully support PD4's desire to be an associate member of ICTU. The need for troops at the moment to quarantine for 4 weeks in relation to overseas deployment should mean extra pay, and I would ask you to look at that, Minister. Our Defence Forces are presently demoralised due to poor pay and conditions, and we absolutely need to look at that as a priority. We also need to look at the urgent need to improve living conditions in the Curragh and in other barracks. At this point in time, I just want to mention the Army Ranger Wing and their allowances that have not been implemented, and to hand over to my colleague, Senator Malcolm Byrne. Thank you.
Thank you, and I would echo the views of my colleague, Senator Loughlin, and I think, Minister, you'll be aware, and you'll see because of the interest in this House, and I know in the other House, of this issue, many local authorities have passed motions in support of this. While what you're proposing, and I know you're genuinely interested in this, while what you're proposing is not perhaps the solution that many of us would have sought, I would urge that you ask that that investigation would begin as quickly as possible, bearing in mind that there are only 8 men who are still alive from that period, and given while they're youthful in their enthusiasm, it is really important, Minister, that that investigation would take place as quickly as possible, that the Chief of Staff would report to you as quickly as possible, and if I could ask you to please indicate a time frame as to when you might anticipate that report to come back.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Gerard Crockwell, you have 8 minutes.
Minister, I want to welcome you to the House. I think this is the first time I've met you as Minister for Defence in this House, so I want to congratulate you on that. I also want to congratulate you on the fact that you haven't appointed a junior minister to work under you in defence, that you've taken a hands-on position, and I know you have met the representative bodies and visited a number of centres and units throughout the country. I want to tell you now, I'm 100% behind you. I want to work with you, and I want to see you achieve the things you have told me you want to achieve with the Defence Forces. Our Defence Forces are a proud group of people, and all they need is that recognition that you are working to get them. Since October 2016, Minister, I've called on the government of the day to award medals to the Jadotville heroes on 28 separate occasions, the most recent being in the Order of Business a couple of weeks ago. The first time I raised the issue was in 2016, after the parade organised by ex-Sergeant Paul Clark at Collins's barracks, which was called Jadotville Day and which has been held since. I came into this chamber and said it was a sad reflection on the country that we did not do those heroes proud. We have not issued them with the medals for the service they have given the country. Over the last 4 years, I've travelled the length and breadth of the country, and I've been honoured to meet surviving Jadotville veterans and proud families of those who are sadly deceased. However, my greatest sadness and remorse is I served as a sergeant alongside 3 of the heroes of Jadotville in Duna Melissa Igaliev, and never knew that these people had served in Jadotville and never heard word of Jadotville. And the people I'm talking about are Corporal Sean Flynn, Private Charlie Cooley, who was nominated for the DSM, and Gunner Bobby Orr, who all served in Galway. I want to say to these men particularly, because I trained recruits in Galway, I want to say I am deeply, deeply sorry that I did not know of their heroism and that I was not in a position to introduce recruits to them as the heroes they were. I want to acknowledge in particular today John Gorman. John devoted most of his life in fighting for the recognition of the people, his peers that served with him in Jadotville. And if any man deserves recognition in this House today, it's John Gorman. I've stood in the chamber on a number of occasions and noted the passing of valiant members of A Company who went to their grave without the vindication and honour they deserved. I have met the families of those who took their own lives because on their return from Jadotville, they came back, believe it or not, as heroes when they marched through Athlone. Most of them came from Galway and from Athlone. They marched into Athlone as heroes, and a very short time later, they were regarded as cowards. I heard names being called out by the Cathaoirleach at the start of today. One that sticks in my mind is Jeff Cuff. Jeff and myself served in Athlone, training potential NCOs. Wonderful character in his time. Minister, the people that were nominated for medals, military medals for gallantry, Company Sergeant Jack Prendergast, Sergeant John Monaghan, Sergeant Walter Hegarty, who is related to myself through my niece, Corporal Tig Quinn, Private Gerald Henley. Those that were recommended for DSMs, Captain Liam Donnelly, Lieutenant Kevin Knightley, Lieutenant Noel Keary, still with us, Lieutenant Tom Quinlan, Company Sergeant Jack Prendergast, Sergeant John Monaghan, Sergeant Walter Hegarty, who did get a DSM at a later stage, Sergeant Tom Kelly, Corporal Frank Williams, Corporal James Ray, Corporal James Lucy, Corporal Tom MacDonald, Corporal John Foley, Corporal John McDonough, Corporal John McManus, Corporal Ty Quinn, Corporal Michael Lynch, Private Joe Kane, Private Robert Larkin, Private Michael McCormack, Private Tom Gunn, Private Charles Cooley. Charlie, I know, is watching today. Charlie was a great character in Renmore. Private Thomas Flynn, Private Michael Tye, Private Daniel Malloy, Private John Niesel, Private Jim Fury, Private Noel Stanley, Private Michael Brennan, Private Gerard Henley, Private Matt Quinlan, Private Michael Galvin and Private Patrick McCartan. I've got to say that those are recommendations, Minister, and I fully support what you're trying to do. This is a military matter. It is not a political matter. It is up to the military authorities to re-examine this case and make recommendations to you, Minister. It is not for politicians to decide who gets medals in this world. The late Commandant Quinlan's action is cited in military textbooks worldwide as the best example of the use of the so-called perimeter defence. The siege of Jadotville is internationally regarded as one of the most heroic battles in Irish military history, and to this day is hailed as an example of bravery and military genius. Why is it that we cannot recognise our heroes? Why is it the Australians can 75 years after an event award the Victoria Cross and we haven't done it? Again, it falls back to the military to look at this and make recommendations to you, not for you to demand medals for anybody. Minister, I could go through the battle and the various waves that happened, but there is no point in doing that. We have all heard of it before and there's no point in replaying that here today. A Company suffered no collateral damage, a few people wounded, but that's all. But they inflicted massive damage on the enemy. Over the last 4 years, Minister, I've had the unique privilege of working with John Gorman and Commandant Leo Quinlan, the son of Pat Quinlan. Indeed, I served under all of the Quinlans at one stage or other in my career, a fine military family. Pat, without doubt, the Colonel, Commandant at the time, was a leader second to none. For a man that came from a military background with no experience of warfare and no experience of battle, his leadership in Jadotville is phenomenal, second to none. I want to compliment former Taoiseach Enda Kenny for the brave step he took in bringing about An Bun Jadotville, and it was a tremendous day for all of us. I want to thank the students of Galway Community College and Malahide Community School for their political lobbying on behalf of Jadotville, and particularly the history teachers there. Minister, there are 8 veterans still alive. We've heard this today. But the fact that there are 8 veterans still alive does not mean that we can throw out the rule book and give the 8 people medals. What we need to do is, as my colleague Senator Byrne said, let's expedite the Chief of Staff's research into this. Let's get a medals board together and see can we make a recommendation. A recommendation is not a medal, and that needs to be learned here. But what needs to happen is an open and transparent appraisal of what took place in Jadotville, and then where medals are due to issue them. Because I am extremely proud of the people that I'm speaking of today. I am extremely proud of people like Charlie Cooley. Good God, I met Charlie not so terribly long ago, sitting in a wheelchair. You know, they're all men in their 80s now. And at the end of the day, we did do some service to them by giving them the Bun Jadotville, but we need to go the extra step and clearly decide one way or the other. Finally, Minister, I would ask the Chief of Staff to include 2 further people in his deliberations. And one is Pat Quinlan, who was never recommended for any medal whatsoever, but he was the leader on the day. And the other is John Gorman, whom I believe, in the finest military tradition, he has gone over and above the call of duty to ensure that his peers and his colleagues were recognised in Jadotville.
Thank you,
Senator. Look, I'm sorry for going over time. Thank you very much.
Senator John McGahan.
Thank you very much, Minister. Firstly, I'd like to start off by thanking Senator Joe O'Reilly, who is the Fine Gael spokesperson on defence, for allowing me to lead in this debate on behalf of our party and to take that time. So I'd like to thank Senator O'Reilly for that. And before I get into the merits of this debate and why I believe we should have these medals awarded, I want to pay tribute to individuals like Senator Crockwell, like former Senator Gab McFadden, people who were lone voices in the wilderness for so long, who are now been joined by a chorus of voices of political parties and none from right across both chambers of this Oireachtas. And I really want to pay tribute to those individuals, first of all. And indeed, one only needs to put the word Jadotville into Kildare Street to look at the flurry of PQs, commencement debates, mention of the order of business by Senator Wall last week, and so many of us here in the last month alone, let alone what individuals have been doing on both sides of the House. I want to also highlight how what I have found as a new member of this House, what the most refreshing aspect of this debate is that there is no political one-upmanship from any of us here. There is no one trying to get out in front of another individual. There is no one trying to get credit or anything like that. Everybody is very much on the same page. We're all sharing information with each other that we get back from representations. We're all talking to each other. You know, I've picked up the phone to Senator Crockwell and, you know, Senator Wall more times in the last couple of weeks than ever before. And I really think that is an important thing to put on it. We are very much all on the same page here. And that also, Minister Coveney, brings me to you, who, as a former Minister of Defence, previously have really engaged. You really have in your office have really engaged in this issue to date. And I want to thank you for that, because I know you are extremely genuine and extremely sincere. And we have seen that in your remarks today, and I think we can all agree with that, that the Minister very much wants to see some sort of successful conclusion brought to this. I also want to pay tribute to Commandant Leo Quinlan, son of Pat Quinlan. Without the determination of Leo over the last couple of years, I would be fearful that that issue could have fallen by the wayside, could have fallen into the annals of time and could have been forgotten about. And if it wasn't for Commandant Leo Quinlan, who I've had the pleasure of speaking with on a number of occasions over the last week to increase my own understanding of what is a very complex issue, we may not even be discussing these issues today. The Jadotville action is the biggest military engagement that the Irish Army have ever faced against a foreign enemy since the foundation of this state. It's likened to the Battle of the Alamo in 1836, to the Battle of Rorke's Drift in 1879 during the Zulu Wars. Can you imagine that, I suppose, when you think about it, that 155 Irish troops and a battle that they engaged in is in the same league, historically speaking, as the Battle of the Alamo? Just 155 Irish troops are in that same level of military engagement in the history of military conflict in the world. And that's a result because of the incredible tactician and military strategist that Commandant Pat Quinlan was. That's why that battle is right up there. It's because of his ability in terms of being a military tactician. And the fact that only 5 Irish troops were wounded during that 5-day siege is a testament to Commandant Quinlan and how he valued the lives of the troops under his command, that he ensured that a field of fire, which Senator Crockwell explained to me earlier today, a field of fire was placed on enemy targets, rather than putting Irish troops in situations where their lives, the threat of injury or death were dramatically increased because of the position that they were put in. He kept his soldiers safe. He looked after them. And that's why only 5 were wounded in a 5-day siege against 3,500 enemy forces. Minister, I believe there are historical reasons as to why medals weren't awarded back in the 1960s, in the 1970s and the 1980s. And I'm not here today to dwell on those historical reasons. That's for others to decide, and it's in the past. What I'm here to do today is to focus on the present, to focus on the here and now, about what we can do to try and bring a level of justice to this debate. And I want to be very, very clear, and Senator Crockwell was even clearer than I, that awarding these medals, Minister, is not in your personal gift whatsoever. And it would be wrong if it was, because then we're bringing politicians into ministerial aspects. That's wrong. And it's wrong for anyone else to suggest otherwise, and no one has. But it's easy for that to get lost in the emotion of the debate. It is not the Minister's role, and it's not in his gift or his ability to award medals, military medals. But what we can do, and what I think is simple enough, is that we request the Chief of Staff of the Irish Army to convene a medals board, as has already been outlined, and let that medals board examine the whole thing again in light of new information that I have no doubt will be supplied when the expert grouping meets. And if they decide there's nothing to answer here, if they decide that, which I don't think they will, but if they do, well, that is fair enough, because we have asked for a medals board to be reconvened to examine the issue again in much greater detail. And yes, there are technicalities, and yes, there are stumbling blocks around Defence Force regulations, and it means we have to amend them slightly to look at something like Jadotville. Then let's do it. I really believe, Minister, that you are very genuine in your desire on this issue, and we have seen that with your opening statement today. A number of members will be aware of the work that Minister Coveney's office have done in the last couple of weeks as well in engaging in this issue and to try and bring it to I won't say a successful conclusion, but to really try and move the matter forward as much as possible. And I can't speak for any other members here, but I would like to think that all of us would agree that we are very thankful for that, especially when so many of us have been raising it over the last couple of weeks, in my case, or years, in the case of Senator Crockwell and others. Finally, Minister, I'm a firm believer in that it's never too late to do the right thing, no matter what the issue is in life. It's never too late, whether it's 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or in the case of this, the 50th anniversary or the 60th anniversary back in early September. And if we allow this debate to continue on and to rumble on over the next year or 2 years, we're going to have a situation where more of the surviving 8 veterans will sadly have passed away or just succumb to old age. And we'll look back at this moment now and we'll just say to ourselves, God, how foolish were we not to try and fix this issue in the here and now. There's no point trying to do it after these people have passed away and award it posthumely. There's no point whatsoever. It's amazing when you think about it, that these surviving men were just boys when they came under enemy fire in sub-Saharan Africa. Boys, 15, 16-year-old boys. And they survived, and they need to be recognised. And my only ask coming out of this debate, and I'm very thankful, Minister, that you've actually come to this House with a clear outline of what you intend to do. You haven't come here and paid lip service and kind of walked out, given, you have come here with a clear, definitive plan of how you want to progress this issue. And my only ask would be that you set very clear time limits that everyone in this House knows about, of when the expert group will report back to the Chief of Staff, and then when the Chief of Staff reports back to you for you to make any potential decision. If we have a clear time frame, I think that would calm a lot of the fears among the military community and many members of this Oireachtas.
you very much, Cahill, and can I thank you and indeed other members for listing the names of those of A Company. I think it's always very important to remember, and I think that was a very poignant moment at the start of this particular debate. Minister, I would like to welcome you into the House. As I've said, and others have, or I was about to say, and others have said, I think it's the first time you're joining us today as the Minister for Defence, and I look forward to working with you as a Labour Party spokesperson on defence, on the future of the Irish Defence Forces. I also want to thank fellow senators, Senator McGann and Senator Crockwell, and indeed other senators. They've basically said that this has seen agreement across the House, and that is very important, and it is very heartening to hear the support of these heroes right across the House. I would also thank, and it's very important to thank, the Leader for allowing us the time on the order of business today to discuss this particular important matter. The siege of Jadotville was and has been described by the Minister's own department and again today a prominent event that occurred during Ireland's peacekeeping mission in the Congo in September 1961. A Company 35th Infantry Battalion took responsibility for the UN post at Jadotville on the 3rd of September 1961. On the 9th of September, a large hostile force of locals and indeed international mercenaries surrounded them and began monitoring their every move. At 7:48 a.m. on the morning of the 13th of September, A Company came under attack from far superior numbers. From the 13th to the 17th of September, they endured almost continuous and sustained attack. They were taken into captivity on the 17th of September and remained in captivity until finally released on the 25th of October 1961. Minister, in replies to my Labour Party colleagues over the last number of months, including the last reply in September, your department has commented, and I quote, "Over the last number of years, various representations have been received in my department outlining the courageous and bravery of A Company. All representations have been considered and responded to, acknowledging the valiant actions while under siege in Jadotville. With regard to inquiries about additional medals, it has previously been indicated that any additional documentation, information or evidence to support the request to award such medals will be considered. At this juncture, the reply from September states, no new information has come to light." Minister, it is my belief and understanding indeed that the documentation you refer to does exist and has been presented to your department. This information explains why medals were not given at the time and why this heroic episode in Irish military history was effectively swept under the carpet. The documentation, I'm informed, goes on to say that there was a recommendation made by the commanding officer at Jadotville to award 28 Distinguished Service Medals, DSMs, to those who served, and a Distinguished Service Medal and a Military Medal for Gallantry, our highest award for valour, to 5 more of the men of A Company by Commandant Pat Quinlan after the siege. It is also my understanding, Minister, that the UN are currently looking at recognising the gallantry of these men. A timely reminder we're all sure, and we can all agree on, that our own country must finally award the medals previously mentioned. I'm sure you would agree, Minister, that we should all be very proud of these men. You have said it here in the House today. The engagement that these soldiers were involved in Jadotville is now held up by many military armies and educators as the example of perimeter defence. It is taught and indeed studied by many military colleges around the world. A lasting legacy to Commandant Quinlan and his men, but also a lasting legacy to the Irish Defence Forces. For unfortunately, we all know it was not always like this. Many of these men were scorned and ridiculed upon their return home following the engagement in the Congo. The term Jadotville Jack used against these men and indeed held against our defence forces by those who were simply uneducated of what the men of A Company had faced and indeed achieved in defending their post for 5 days against a force over 20 times their size. These men were and have always been proud standard bearers of our state's exceptional service to the UN as peacekeepers around the world. Their service, loyalty and bravery thankfully now recognised by all those that have studied this engagement. Over the last number of months and since we returned to the Seanad, we have all raised the bravery of Commandant Quinlan, as I've said, right across all political groups. During this time also, we have seen a number of campaigns promoting recognition for these men and hopefully ensuring that every Irish person will get to know of their bravery. I want to mention one of those campaigns, that of the South East military veterans, who along with a large number of county councillors have coordinated a motion passing in support of this recognition in more than 18 local authorities, with more motions to come. I'm sure many of you here today have spoken and received commentary from those who have recently watched the 2016 film The Siege of Jadotville, directed by Richie Smith, based on the book by Declan Power. The one line that is continuously raised by these people is the bravery of these young men, but just as important is the pride people feel that these men were Irish, representing this country and indeed our defence forces. I suppose, like many of you here today, I've grown up watching war action films. These films depict great armies, great victories or historic defences. This film showcases Irish heroes on an international stage, and yes, it is pride that is the overwhelming emotion felt by anybody who has seen the action depicted on the small screen. Minister, over the last number of months I've spoken to many family members of those who had loved ones who fought at Jadotville. They have lived their lives through stories of what happened over those 5 fateful days in September 1961 and in the subsequent months. Inaccurate reports of mass Irish casualties, I'm sure, haunted them in the early stories of the battle. Thankfully, all of those involved in this siege survived and are all acknowledged their commanding officer, Commandant Quinlan, in achieving this. I've asked a number of them what it would mean to see their loved ones honoured in the way that Commandant Quinlan asked, and their replies include, "It would mean everything to me and my family. All the hardship my dad went through would be finally recognised." Another said, "It would be a right finally done," while another said, "It would be wishes finally carried out." Minister, there were 155 men involved in this engagement on the Irish side. Those men continued to serve their country in further engagements before they actually arrived home. It's incredible that these men came from all over Ireland, but quite remarkable that Assumption Road in Athlone provided 13 of these gallant soldiers. Some of these soldiers were just 16 years old, and unfortunately this engagement had very sad consequences on their lives following their return home from the Congo. 8 of these men, as has been said, are still alive, but there are generations of Irish people alive because of the historic defence of their position by Commandant Quinlan and his men. Often referred to as Jadotville babies, they have grown up with stories of their fathers, their grandfathers and indeed their great-grandfathers. Unfortunately, they wait, like we all do, for these medals to be awarded. It is never too late to do the right thing, Minister. Next year will be the 60th anniversary of what has been described by many as one of the greatest events in Irish military history. It is important to acknowledge that a special medal was indeed awarded in 2017, and on the 55th anniversary there was a unit citation. However, the awarding of the DSMs and the MMGs, in my opinion, and more importantly in the opinion of relatives and loved ones of those who fought at Jadotville, is the right thing to do. It would, as relatives have said, mean everything to them. I want to welcome the fact today, Minister, and the time left to me, that the Chief of Staff will set up an independent group of external experts. I think that's the way to go. I also want to support what you said. Politicians should not award medals, but I'm sure you can agree with me that where we're brought incidents like Jadotville and the heroes we have, we should bring them to your attention as the Minister of Defence so we can go through the due process of awarding those medals. Thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you. Senator Vincent Pima.
Cathaoirleach, I welcome the Minister to the House. It's a sign of how serious this matter is being taken. It's also a good day for the Upper House, Seanad Éireann, that we can come up with an initiative like this and ventilate our views and have such a constructive, positive debate, shining a light on this that mightn't be always open to the lower house to do. It is, of course, fitting that we acknowledge the courageous efforts of A Company 35th Infantry Battalion, and it is only right that this House acknowledges the valiant defence of Jadotville in September 1961. I am sure my colleagues in this House will also join in me in thanking them, but also the thousands of members of the Defence Forces and Garda Síochána who have served this country and the United Nations with honour since 1958. During this debate, I think especially of those Defence Force personnel and their Garda colleagues, since the Garda have also service abroad, who have died overseas in the cause of international peace and security. And we should not let this hour pass without remembering the members of An Garda Síochána and Oireachtas Éireann who have given their life for the people of Ireland to have a safer place, who have died at home. This week also marks the 60th anniversary of a tragic incident which the Minister referred to, involving the men of another A Company. On the 8th of November 1960, an 11-man patrol from A Company of the 33rd Infantry Battalion departed their base at Niemba under the command of Lieutenant Kevin Gleeson. Unfortunately, Lieutenant Gleeson and 8 brave souls never came home. They perished after being attacked without warning by a large number of Baluba tribesmen. These deaths were the first operational casualties suffered by the Defence Forces since the Civil War and remain the highest toll from a single action suffered by the Defence Forces in the cause of world peace. That ambush brought home immediately to this country the harsh realities and challenges facing our peacekeepers when we choose to send them abroad, and in total 26 members of the Defence Forces would die while serving in the Congo. I mentioned a Niemba ambush during today's discussion because I would like to acknowledge that the actions of Jadotville were neither the first nor the last episodes of exceptional bravery and gallantry by our soldiers, sailors and aircrew. They are, however, a very important exemplar of the fine traditions of loyal, selfless service we have come to associate with Oireachtas Éireann. While the siege of Jadotville and the sustained assaults which they suffered, both from air and from the ground, have been widely known, and as Senator Walsh had documented in the movie on Netflix, The Siege of Jadotville, it's often forgotten that these men not only faced the horrors of the battlefield for those 5 heated days, but they also endured over a month of gruelling captivity, a captivity where they could not be certain that they would come through it alive, and finally, after being released, they faced another military engagement prior to returning home. Many more served again in the Congo, in Cyprus and in our border, on the border of the island of Ireland, and of course in Lebanon. These men are the personification of the finest ideals of our foreign policy and the national spirit, and it is due to their actions and the actions of their colleagues that this country is held in the highest esteem around the globe, and especially in the UN General Assembly. As we take our seat again on the UN Security Council in 2021, let us remember that the blood and sweat and tears of our Jadotville veterans and many others form the tangible bedrock of our continued commitment to the founding ideals of the United Nations. These men, both during their service and in their retirement, have demonstrated their commitment to the Defence Forces values of respect, of loyalty, of selflessness, physical and moral courage, and I believe it is time that we in this House give them the respect and loyalty that they are due by supporting this motion. To paraphrase Leo Quinlan, son of Commandant Quinlan, speaking in 2019 on the tragic legacy of the Jadotville, he said, "Every battle has to be fought twice, first in the field and secondly with historians." I think we can all agree that a third unfortunate battle between the state and the survivors needs to end, with the recognition that these men deserve. I call on the Minister of Defence, and I know and I'm very pleased to welcome what he said today, to do all in his power to ensure that the medal commendations made by Colonel Quinlan, he was a commandant at the time but since became Colonel, and now he has passed, obviously at this stage, retired as a Colonel, but he wanted to have his recommendations reviewed again by a competent military board, which I'm sure this external expert board will do. While I am aware that the military board sat in 1965 and considered some of Colonel Quinlan's recommendations, I think we must acknowledge that official attitudes, culture and, if you like, biases at the time may have significantly hampered the work of that board. As Senator McGahern said, many of these soldiers were mere teenagers, but regardless of their age, all of their lives were changed irreparably by their service in the Congo. In addition to the physical scars, many of these men brought home a significant number of unseen scars for the remainder of their lives. These traumas were undoubtedly exacerbated by the lack of recognition of their deeds at the time and their shameful abandonment in retirement. Men may not have died on the battlefields of Katanga that week, but let us be under no illusion that men changed irreparably as a result of that siege, and for the worse. Lacking proper recognition during service and care and support in retirement, many of these heroes turned to alcohol, which is documented in published reports, and others tragically ended up taking their own life, according to a piece published in the Irish Times. That's what you're dealing with here. They changed forever by serving for peace. So military medals are highly valued and regarded as representing all that is best in the field of human endeavour. Medals in themselves cannot be a starting point or a finishing line when it comes to the state engaging with its faithful servants. All members of the Defence Forces swear an oath of fidelity to the Ireland and loyalty to the Constitution. They commit to serving the state and the cause of international peace and security at any time or place in the world. They take on the responsibility willingly, and this commitment cannot be one-sided, and this places a reciprocal onus on us to support them in putting the needs of the nation, the Defence Forces and others before their own. They expect to be treated fairly by the state, and they expect the support of society and the whole of government. I have to say, as a public representative from Kildare, which has such a fine military tradition, and my two senator colleagues from the South Kildare constituency, but it's not just Kildare, this is an Irish issue. But it rings home so strongly in Kildare. But in Waterford, Councillor Jodie Power tabled a motion, the Green councillor, to support and promote recognition. And I know many other county councils will join with us. And I welcome the Minister moving things and advancing things on today. Of course, there are boundaries, and there's only so much you can do, Minister, and I think you have done as much as you can on this occasion. And we really look forward to this being moved on swiftly and promptly.
Senator Boylan.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and welcome to the Minister. And I suppose I'd like to add Sinn Féin's voices to this motion to recognise the sacrifices of the soldiers at the siege of Jadotville. September 2021 marks 60 years since one of the most remarkable and some would say miraculous sieges in military history. During what was known as the Congo Crisis, 1960 to 1963, a contingent of 155 Irish UN troops designated A Company, commanded by Commandant Pat Quinlan, had been sent to the mining town of Jadotville, now known as Lakasi, ostensibly to assist in the protection of its citizens following a request by the Belgian ambassador to the UN. A Company quickly found themselves in hostile territory from the beginning, with the locals distrustful to the point of resentment of the UN presence. At 7:40 on the morning of Wednesday, the 13th of September 1961, the Katangis attacked while many of the UN Irish troops were attending an open-air mass. Expecting to take the men off guard, the first attackers moved in rapidly, but were spotted by an Irish sentry, and a warning shot by Private Billy Reedy alerted the company to the threat. Reedy was wounded in a later exchange. The attackers had a strength of 3,000 to 5,000 men, mostly Katangis and settlers, but with many Belgian, French and Rhodesian mercenaries armed with a mix of light and heavy armament and with air support. And for the most part, the Irish UN soldiers were armed with only light personal weapons, a small number of machine guns and mortars. A Company, 35th Battalion, suffered 5 wounded in action with no fatalities during the siege. The Katangis, on the other hand, suffered heavy losses. Up to 300 were killed, including 30 mercenaries, and an indeterminate number were wounded, with figures ranging from 300 to 1,000. And in the end, with his position untenable, without any clear orders or promise of assistance, having run out of ammunition and food and low on water, Commandant Quinlan accepted the second offer to surrender to the Katangis on the afternoon of Sunday, the 17th of September 1961. And those Irish soldiers were then held as prisoners of war for approximately a month, while the Katangis negotiated terms of release that would inflict the most embarrassment on the UN. And although A Company, 35th Battalion, had tactically defeated a larger enemy force at Jadotville, the Irish Defence Forces leadership did not overtly acknowledge the battle, and there may have been perceived shame that A Company had surrendered, or because of political and strategic errors demonstrated at higher levels. And it's important to put that into the record, what happened over those days. And after the incident, the fact that no Irish soldier has received any decoration for his actions at Jadotville, even though Quinlan recommended 33 of his men for the Military Medal for Gallantry. In 2004, Irish Minister for Defence Willie O'Dea then agreed to hold a full review of the battle. A Defence Forces inquiry cleared Quinlan and A Company of allegations of soldierly misconduct. Commandant Pat Quinlan, whose actions are cited in military textbooks worldwide as the best use of the perimeter defence, and who died in 1997, only had his public reputation restored 9 years after his death. In 2005, a commemorative stone recognising the soldiers of A Company was erected on the grounds of Custom Barracks at Lone, the barracks from which A Company departed for their mission. A commissioned portrait of Quinlan was installed in the Congo room of the Irish Defence Forces UN School. In October 2017, a plaque commemorating Quinlan was unveiled in his native county Kerry by former Taoiseach Enda Kenny, and they were presented with special medals on Bon Jadotville at a ceremony. Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence Simon Coveney said the matter of bravery medals for the man was considered by a properly constituted medals board in 1965 and that no awards were made for Jadotville. The decision was approved by the then Chief of Staff. A later Chief of Staff ordered a review of the decision and it was upheld. The Minister said that both medals are time-bound, 2 years in the case of the Military Medal of Gallantry and 4 years for the Distinguished Service Medal. However, I think that all of the honours that have been bestowed on the members of A Company show that there is an appetite out there among the public and across the political divide to appropriately recognise the sacrifice that was made. And I want to add, as I said, Sinn Féin's voice to the motion here today that, look, we're legislators and nobody is saying the politicians should be giving out military medals, but we need to fix this before the men pass on. It's within our gift to do that as legislators, and I think that certainly across this House we've all come with one voice to say to the Minister that we recognise the complications of it, but that doesn't mean that we don't try to fix it.
Thank you. Senator Black.
I would like to welcome the Minister to the House today. On behalf of my colleagues in the Civil Engagement Group, we are in wholehearted support of this motion to recognise the gallantry of the soldiers of A Company who fought bravely and professionally in the siege of Jadotville in 1961. It's paramount that after 59 years we finally recognise and honour the bravery, the professionalism and gallantry of the 155 Irish soldiers who fought to defend themselves during this failed peacekeeping mission in Katanga. I just can't begin to imagine the fear and the terror experienced by those young men when they had to fight for their lives for 5 days straight. These men were as young as 15 years old, having to fight to survive against 4,000 soldiers until they had no choice but to call for a ceasefire when they ran out of water. And being a mother myself, and I know we're all family members in this house today, being a mother myself, I shudder to think of the poor families suffering at home, knowing that once the siege had finished, their sons, their brothers, husbands were held captive in prisoner of war camps for 6 weeks. The soldiers were at the mercy of others until the UN could finally negotiate their release. It's a story of profound trauma that nobody should ever have to experience. I can't begin to imagine the panic and hopelessness that they all must have felt at the time. So it's essential that we not only recognise their struggle today, but also recognise the masterful skills of Commander Pat Quinlan, who the men of A Company fought valiantly under. He has since been referred to as a masterful tactician. His foresight allowed them to prepare defences and dig trenches for an anticipatory attack that would ultimately ensure the survival of all 155 peacekeepers. So I think now it's high time that they be presented with the award of Distinguished Service Medals. The siege of Jadotville is a major part of our history in Ireland. We must treat it and remember it as such. More has been done in recent years to honour and remember the heroes, but these medals would signify a deep mark of respect and gratitude with the highest of military awards and decorations of Ireland. I believe with every fibre of my being that these heroes are more than just deserving of such an accolade. Noel Carey was only 24 years old, and he remembered thinking to himself on the 13th of September as the battle broke out, "As the shells and bullets rained down on us, I just thought, we were supposed to be peacekeepers. Now we're all going to get killed." The men spent the following 6 weeks in captivity, where Irish men as young as 15 were held in camps until the United Nations negotiated their release. But I think perhaps the most painful part of this history is how the men of A Company were treated when they returned home to Ireland. They were publicly condemned and referred to as cowards for calling for a ceasefire. They were viewed as weak by the press and the media, their bravery, masterful tactics and gallantry all forgotten and pasted over with shame. For that I feel deep regret. But the most heartbreaking part of the story is that from the group of 155 soldiers, 5 of them took their own lives after the trauma they had experienced and the public condemnation. To me, this shows me that we have failed them before, where these men couldn't get the help they needed in mental health crisis, that the trauma they carried was too heavy to live with. We failed them. We cannot fail them again. This deeply upsetting and unfair part of our history needs to be remembered. Their pain and suffering needs to be remembered. We simply cannot allow these heroes to be forgotten. And I'm so glad to hear, Minister, that this issue is receiving further consideration. I'm sure that, we would all agree, and including yourself, Minister, that wouldn't it be just great to see these men receive the Distinguished Service Medals and military medals for gallantry, as it just shows a sincere mark of respect and gratitude to the men of A Company and acknowledge the seed of Jadotville as a cherished part of our Irish history.
Thank you, Senator Black. Senator Chambers.
I propose that we would extend time to facilitate the remaining 5 senators who wish to speak with 1 minute each.
Okay, is that agreed? Just to be aware of the House, the Minister under order of the House is to reply back by 2:39 and we're supposed to finish at 2:45, but I want everybody to get in. So is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. So everyone will get to speak, but it's a minute each. Senator Chambers.
Yeah, thank you, Cathaoirleach. Very briefly, just to welcome, Minister, your reply today that there will be a review board set up, and to commend Rear Admiral Mark Mellett for his flexibility in this regard. And I would agree with your position that it's not for politicians to award medals, it is for the military to do so. I do personally think there is something special about the siege of Jadotville. That's why it has exercised us for so many years, and why there is such emotion in this House, and it extends beyond this House. And we have former serving military personnel in this House that are speaking from very personal experience. So there is something different about this as opposed to other instances, but I take on board your point. And just the wider point that I wish to make while you're here, Minister, is that I think we have a strange relationship in this country with the Defence Forces. We do not do enough to acknowledge the Defence Forces' role, its special place within our society, and I think we need to do a bit more around promoting the Defence Forces. And I think the loss of so many members of the Reserve Defence Forces in particular, because they were the personal connection in each town and village in Ireland with the Defence Forces and with the uniform, and that link has been broken and is gone. So I think, Minister, a little bit of work around promoting our Defence Forces more broadly would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Davitt.
Thank you very much. Again, I'd like to welcome the Minister here today, and I certainly welcome the promised review, and I feel it's imperative that the committee is given a free path to make its own findings and recommendations, and I suppose the composition of the committee is most important, as you've alluded to yourself, Minister. As you've stated, there were 2 reviews in 62 and 65, and I think, Minister, in the fullness of time, the narrative and perspective can change. I would also like to commend several county councils, including my own Westmeath, under the stewardship of Cathaoirleach Ken Glynn, and I know Joe Carroll in Cork and several different councils had this on their agenda and certainly approved the speeding up of this. Lastly, A Company leader, Commandant Quinlan, had recommended 27 of his men be awarded the Distinguished Service Medal and 5 received the Military Medal of Gallantry. Lastly, I'd like to mention Tom Gunn from Mullingar, who had served in Jadotville, and I'd recommend that all these serving members are interviewed as part of this process. Thank you.
Senator Joe Riley, 1 minute.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and welcome, Minister. And I acknowledge your real engagement with this issue. I thought, given the shortness of time, Cathaoirleach, that I'd use a quote here from Commandant Quinlan. He ruefully stated, "If you have men killed, you have a victory, but if you save your men and have a good defence, it is a defeat." And obviously, that was the context of its interpretation later. And I hope that the commission that's set up, and it's welcome that it's set up, and I hope it reports quickly, etc. But I also hope it looks very deeply into the historical context, the culture of the time, the direction that the men sent, whether in fact they should have been sent to Jadotville in the first instance, and that's a very questionable proposition. Therein may lie the fault, and therein may lie, if you like, a kind of a historical cover-up in the past. They should not have been directed there. And so, recognising the time factor, I welcome the Commission. I think we should be very proud of our armed forces, our defence forces, and very retrospectively proud of these men and proud of the survivors. And I think they deserve recognition. I'm so impressed by the real engagement with it now, and I do think if a proper historical analysis is taken, this case stands for recognition of these men. Thank you.
Senator Micheál Carrigy, 1 minute.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I welcome the Minister. First of all, I want to compliment the Cathaoirleach on reading the roll of the names into the House of the Record. Look, I just want to fully support the campaign by the former members of the Defence Forces, in particular Senator Craughwell here and Senator Wall and Senator McGahan, who have put this issue on the agenda. I spoke this morning to one member that's surviving, that lives in my own native parish, Private John Dowler. Sean is known to me, just in relation to it. And he said to me, he said, we were treated as lepers. We were told not to talk about it, and we were treated as lepers. In 2017, the government decided, as an exceptional step, to award the medal to each member of the battalion to recognise their courageous actions. The ceremony, which took place in Athlone, which is considered the home of the company, took place, and rightly so. As I say, they were issued, which was actually the first step by the state in recognising the men. But I welcome the fact that the Chief of Staff is currently considering the matter in the context of the award of medals and its implications, and indeed the Independent Medals Board, which has been set up to consider the case. And I agree with a number of comments here that it is up to the military to decide and not politicians who receives medals. We need to right or wrong. Simple as that. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Senator Dolan. 1 minute.
Just to welcome the Minister as well here today. We need to recognise the heroic nature of this unit and Commandant Pat Quinlan, who kept his team alive. We have the barracks in Athlone. Many families in Roscommon and Galway have served with distinction in the Irish Army, and we have generations of families whose lives are intertwined with the Defence Forces. As senators have mentioned here, and Senator Carrigy as well, the Anbun Jadotville Medal was actually awarded at a special ceremony in Athlone, and it is considered the spiritual home of the A Company. The importance of the peacekeeping role of Irish soldiers since 1955 is a key reason that Ireland has been so successful in winning the observer role that we now have in the UN. And the Irish Army and what they've been doing, I suppose, in relation to COVID and helping out the healthcare services is again crucial in how they have come together to help our country in a time of need. Can I ask the Minister the timeline for the independent group to give recommendations, and particularly for our 8 living heroes and veterans of the A Company? That really it is time as a country that we look at the definition and qualities of leadership. What do we consider as leadership? And the bravery and honour of the soldiers who have endured shame when they returned to Ireland. And just really to consider the recommendations, as mentioned by all colleagues here, of the 30 members that Commandant Pat Quinlan recommended for these medals. For the soldiers of Ireland and their families, it's time to recognise the bravery of the A Company in Jadotville and our failures in the 60s to the veterans of this battle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Minister, thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing all the members to contribute on this debate.
Thank you. And the first thing that I'd like to say is that I think that this has been a really useful debate. I hope that that families that are watching get some solace from the fact that that the Seanad has decided to prioritise this debate and has spent as much time discussing the issue and has had so many contributors to the debate as well, which isn't always the case. So I just want to congratulate those of you who have made this happen through the Cathaoirleach, but clearly Senator Craughwell, Senator McGahan, Senator Wall and others who have taken a real personal interest in this issue. You've asked me for timelines, so my commitment here is that we want to have that review concluded with a recommendation to me from the Chief of Staff by the end of March. So I think it's important that we give some time to do this, but not too much time, because I think obviously many people will be waiting. So I think the end of March is a reasonable timeline. It gives that review group a number of months to produce a report for the Chief of Staff upon which we can make informed decisions. Just to say, what I haven't announced today is a medal review board. What I'm saying is that what the Chief of Staff has committed to doing is to put in place an independent review group that's external, so it's not serving personnel per se, and I think that will result in an independent and open-minded review. We'll ensure that the right people, it's a matter for the Chief of Staff to appoint them, but we certainly will make sure that it's a credible review group, and that they produce a report that can then allow us to make decisions that I hope will be welcomed by this House when they're made. I really just want to recognise how responsible this debate has been as well in the context of the politics of this. It is important that it's recognised here and in other fora how medals are awarded, how people are recommended for those awards. For someone who commits a career to the Defence Forces, medals really matter, and the recognition that comes with them, and the precedent that it sets, and how it compares to others who have also been honoured with medals, really matters. And so we need to get this right. This has to be on the basis of a military assessment, but what politicians can do, and what I will do as Minister for Defence, is ensure that we put the political context in place here for this review, that it is done in an open-minded way, that it takes account of history and attitudes of the time and of today, and certainly recognises the fact that, and it has happened on a number of instances now, the recognition of courage and skill and extraordinary contribution and sacrifice that was made by those involved at the time, that now gets the review that it deserves, and that we can move on and make decisions on the back of that. If I need to change regulations to facilitate it, we'll do that. There's going to be no process barriers in place here. But I think the integrity of a medal system and the ownership of that, staying within the military and within medals boards that assess these things, because don't forget, the majority of people who get nominated for consideration for medals don't get awarded them. Like medals assessment boards, it's a tough process. Senator Craughwell will know this, and others that have been in the Defence Forces. It's a tough process. Lots of people get nominated, and it's an honour to be nominated. But actually getting awarded a medal is a big deal, and it should always be, because of the recognition that it represents. So I hope we can progress this issue, and as I say, I'll be more than happy to come back to the Seanad at the end of March or the start of April, when we have a review completed for the Chief of Staff, and on the back of that he can make recommendations to me, which I can assure you will act on quickly if there's a political process required to facilitate the recommendations.